Let's move on to something rather serious, I think. Are the forces of repressive darkness taking our freedom away? I think they are. But what does columnist and editor of Spiked Online website Brendan O'Neill think? Hello, Brendan.
Hey, Kevin.
Now, Brendan, I don't think there's any doubt that if we're not careful, the draconian so-called coronavirus law, which I suppose has been necessary, will deprive us of our basic freedoms on a long-term basis. What worries me, though, is how people seem to embrace this, almost as if they want to be cracked down upon. And this sort of chorus of disapproval about the journalists who dare to question the government. They hate the press. They want the press to be shackled. What is going on? Why are the people so desperate to be ruled with a rod of iron like this?
I don't know. I mean, it is incredibly worrying. And it's the thing that worries me most about the current political culture is the way in which so many people have very quickly taken to being ruled over in an absolutely unprecedented way. I mean, it is really worth taking stock of where we're at right now. There is a law that was passed by Parliament which forbids public gathering, forbids political protests, forbids industrial action. It's a complete and utter restriction on our political rights, and which also gives the police guidance where they can effectively tell you to go home. So you can't leave your house unless you've got a good reason. So we're essentially under house arrest. This kind of thing has never happened in peacetime before. I understand that it may be necessary for a short period of time, but even given that, I am so worried about the lack of discomfort that some people seem to feel about it.
Exactly.
And I wish there was more pushback, more criticism, more discussion.
Yeah, I mean, when you see, I agree with the people that these bizarre number 10 briefing sessions every night are a kind of strange spectacle, almost as if we're being sort of preached on high to, from the Sermon on the Mount from the government. This is what we're going to tell you today and you're going to be happy. But the reaction of the people of Britain is one of fury towards the journalists asking the questions. Why do the people of Britain hate the idea of a free press so much?
One of the things I think the coronavirus has brought out is this petty authoritarian culture that exists in the UK. It really has emboldened the little Hitlers, going around their local park and sneering at people sitting on benches or phoning the police. Phoning the police if someone goes for a second jog, or just being mean and nasty about their neighbours. And, there's quite a few people like that. A lot of them are in the media, in fact. We've seen media people taking photos of people in the park and sharing them on Twitter to shame the public for breaking the rules, even though the vast majority of those people are still social distancing. So I really hate that kind of authoritarian climate that has come out of this, which is reflected in the pushback against any media outlet that asks pressing questions or particularly anyone who questions the lockdown, in fact. I mean, the one thing you are allowed to say is the lockdown should have been earlier. It should have been harder. It should never be lifted. We've lived like this for months and months on end. You're allowed to say that. There's a conformist climate behind that idea in the media. But anyone who is a lockdown skeptic or who say, how long is this going to go on for? Or what about the economy? They're rounded on quite severely. So I'm worried about the collapse of freedom of speech alongside the collapse of our daily freedoms.
Yes, and the journalists are taking all the flack because, according to the furious public, the people who just generically say, I blame the media for everything, according to the public, the journalists are asking terrible questions. I'll tell you what is happening here. They've never seen a press conference before. Suddenly it's a TV show every night. You and I know what press conferences are like. They are journalists asking over-ambitious questions to grey-suited men and women who fob them off with feeble answers. In the end, the problem with these press conferences at number 10 Downing Street, it's not the question, it's the answers.
And I think that's the other problem alongside that. Is the breadth of the debate itself is just not there. We are not having a serious, wide-ranging discussion about all the aspects of life in COVID hit Britain. So, we do hear about the death statistics, we do hear about the care home crisis, we hear about these things, and they are incredibly important that we talk. It's incredibly important we talk about this. But I want a broad discussion on what's happened to freedom, what's happened to press freedom, when is the coronavirus bill going to be taken off the statute books, and what about the forthcoming economic calamity? The Bank of England is predicting the biggest economic crash since the Great Frost of 1709. We need to factor in as much of this stuff as possible so we can have a rounded, free, open discussion about where Britain is heading and whether we're making the right choices right now.
I'm always very wary and reticent about saying we need to apply the law, we need to crack down. But can I ask you this question? Why haven't we, as a nation, forced the university authorities to obey the law and to stop students breaking the law by banning free speech on the campuses?
Well, this is one of the very hilarious things about the current climate we live in. Even though we have this terrible illness afflicting the nation, students are still doing their crazy, illiberal, censorious stuff. So students at University of Oxford recently argued that any teaching material that is offensive should be taken off syllabus. Completely bizarre idea. And in that instance, Oxford University itself actually pushed back and said, listen, guys, you are going to encounter ideas you don't like, you are going to encounter difficult ideas, and you have to just grow up and live with it. And I think that's probably the best response. I think what we actually need on campuses, and the government can help with this by giving resources to universities and so on, we need a culture on campuses where the university itself says, no, we're not having it. We're not going to allow you to say what can be taught and who can speak. We're going to have complete freedom of speech, and that pushback, I think, is really essential.
Yeah, ban safe spaces if you must. Talking about banning, if you want to go to where all the bans happen first, of course, it's Scotland. Now, we've already allowed the hate crime laws to turn into what I think is an industry to smash free speech. But Scotland's bringing in a law that will make insulting tweets illegal.
It's, Scotland freaks me out a little bit, I have to be honest. Not the country or people. I love Scotland. I
agree.
It's an amazing place. And people are fantastic. But the Scottish National Party does unnerve me. They are, I think, the most nanny-state, illiberal party in Western Europe. I mean, they do pass some extraordinarily illiberal measures to control charting of football matches. They wanted to give every single child born in Scotland a state manager to guide them through life. That was eventually cast off the statute books, I think. And now they are really upping the ante on the hate speech front, so that pretty much anything that someone finds insulting or offensive against their beliefs or against their sense of self could find themselves getting into trouble. I really think Scotland has become this laboratory of authoritarian ideas, and I really hope, and I trust, in fact, that many Scottish people will want to push back against it and argue for full freedom of speech online and the right of people to be offensive. It's a central part of freedom of speech is the right to be offensive. You don't have the right not to be offended. That's what people need to understand.
Absolutely. Just before you go, Brendan, one last question. What could be done about this? Is there any cause for optimism? Can we retain our full freedom?
I think, yes. I'm generally quite an optimistic person, and I think we can, but it's a constant fight. And I think generations before ours understood this really well. They understood that freedom and democracy are actually really fragile things. And we know that there's been a pushback against our democratic vote in recent years. There's a constant pushback against freedom of speech. So I think they can be saved, but it's an ongoing battle. It will never be finished. It will never be perfected. We just have to make sure that every time there's an act of censorship, every time there's a new censorious law, we all stand up and say, this cannot be allowed because we don't want to go down that road. So it's constant perseverance and vigilance. That's what we need. Great talking to you, Brendan. Keep up the good fight. That's Brendan O'Neill, columnist and a fierce defender of free speech. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan. You're listening to Talk Radio.